What if the life you were told was perfect was actually a prison? Not a prison with bars or chains. Not a prison you could see or touch or name, but a prison made of pink, made of perfection, made of smiles so wide they almost look like screaming, made of a world so flawlessly constructed, so carefully curated, so relentlessly cheerful, that the moment a single crack appears, the whole thing doesn't just break. It shatters. And that's what this movie is about. That's what nobody warned you about when the trailers dropped and the marketing machine cranked into overdrive and every building in Los Angeles turned neon pink and Ryan Gosling danced and Margot Robbie sparkled and the whole world went completely unhinged, beautifully pink-drunk insane over what looked on the surface like a toy commercial. But it wasn't a toy commercial. It was never a toy commercial. What Greta Gerwig made in the summer of 2023 quietly, brilliantly, defiantly, was one of the most emotionally complex, philosophically layered, and culturally devastating films to come out of Hollywood in the last decade. And the fact that it was wearing a hot pink bow when it did it? That's not the trick. That's the point. So let's go there. Let's go all the way in. Let's walk into Barbie land together. Let's feel the warmth of that perfect plastic sun. Let's watch it all start to fall apart. And let's understand, really understand, why this movie hit so many people so hard in so many different places at once. Because it hit people who weren't expecting to be hit. It hit people who came for the comedy and left sitting in their cars in the parking lot, not quite able to drive yet. It hit middle-aged women who cried at things they couldn't fully explain. It hit teenage girls who recognized something in it they'd never seen named before. It hit men who came in reluctant and left strangely, quietly moved. It hit mothers and daughters simultaneously, sometimes in the same theater seat, reaching for each other's hands in the dark. And that's not an accident. That's filmmaking. That's craft. That's Greta Gerwig doing something extraordinary while making it look like she's just making a fun movie about a doll. Let's go back to the beginning. Let's talk about where this all started. The year is 2023, and before we even get to the film itself, we have to talk about the event. Because Barbie, directed by Greta Gerwig, written by Gerwig and her partner Noah Baumbach, produced by Warner Brothers and Mattel, and released on July 21st of that year, wasn't just a movie. It was a cultural detonation. The marketing campaign alone was something that film historians are going to be studying for years. The entire world turned pink. Partnerships with over 100 brands. A real-life Barbie dream house that you could actually rent on Airbnb. A trailer that showed almost nothing and told you everything you needed to feel. A series of character posters that played with the absurdity of the premise while hinting at something deeper underneath. And then, the release date, shared deliberately and brilliantly with Christopher Nolan's Oppenheimer, creating the cultural phenomenon that the internet immediately and enthusiastically named Barbenheimer. Pink and nuclear fire, plastic and plutonium. Shouldn't have worked. It absolutely worked. Margot Robbie, already one of the most magnetic and technically gifted actors of her generation, was cast as stereotypical Barbie, or, as the film credits her in that breathtaking final joke, Barbie, now known as Barbara Handler. Ryan Gosling, whose comedic instincts have always been wildly underestimated, was cast as Ken. A Ken so perfectly, achingly Ken that it almost hurts to watch. And surrounding them, an ensemble so stacked it barely seems real. America Ferrera, Kate McKinnon, Issa Rae, Simu Liu, Will Ferrell, Michael Cera, Helen Mirren as the narrator, and a dozen other Barbies and Kens played by actors who each brought something specific and wonderful to a world that could have easily dissolved into chaos without grounding. Gerwig had already proven herself with Lady Bird and Little Women films that are, beneath their surface warmth, quietly devastating interrogations of femininity, ambition, identity, and the impossible expectations placed on women from the moment they're born. With Barbie, she took that same obsession and wrapped it in the most recognizable, most culturally loaded feminine icon in the history of consumer capitalism. And the result was something that nobody, not Warner Brothers, not Mattel, not the critics, not the audience, was fully prepared for. The film opened to $162 million domestically in its opening weekend. It went on to gross over $1.4 billion worldwide, making it the highest-grossing film of 2023 and the highest-grossing film ever directed by a woman. And it did this while being, at its core, a film about existential dread, the suffocating weight of societal expectations, the impossibility of female perfection, and the terrifying, beautiful, heartbreaking freedom of choosing to be human. Not bad for a movie about a doll. But now we need to actually go inside it. Because no amount of box office numbers or cultural context can prepare you for the experience of the film itself. The way it moves, the way it pivots, the way it builds something that looks like a joke and turns it quietly into something that aches. So, let's start at the beginning. The film opens with one of the most audacious, funniest, most perfectly constructed sequences in modern Hollywood cinema. It's a direct homage to Stanley Kubrick's 2001, A Space Odyssey, specifically, the famous Dawn of Man sequence, where prehistoric apes encounter the monolith and human consciousness is born. Except instead of apes and a black slab, we get little girls. In the desert, with baby dolls. Helen Mirren's voice, rich, warm, unmistakably authoritative, narrates over the image of this barren landscape, this ancient place, as a group of girls sit surrounded by baby dolls, playing house, playing mommy, playing the only game that had ever been made for them. The dolls are small and soft and domestic. The girls feed them fake bottles and cradle them and pretend to burp them, and there's something almost tender about it for just a moment before the narration shifts. Before Mirren tells us that, before Barbie, little girls only had baby dolls, only had the practice of being mothers, only had the rehearsal of caregiving, only had the one script that the world had written for them, the one story they were allowed to inhabit. And then the monolith appears. Except the monolith is Barbie. A giant, towering, perfectly plastic Barbie, standing in the desert in her original 1959 black and white swimsuit, oversized and impossible and magnificent. And the little girls, one by one, then all at once, look up at her, and something shifts, something changes, and they start smashing their baby dolls. They throw them against the rocks. They hurl them into the air. They smash them against each other with pure, joyful, liberating, slightly terrifying glee. Because suddenly there is another option. Suddenly there is a different story. Suddenly there is a woman, plastic and impossible and perfect, yes, but also undomesticated, career-oriented, owning her own dream house, driving her own car, wearing her own clothes, being, in whatever limited but revolutionary way, her own person. This scene lasts maybe 2 minutes, maybe less, and it is one of the most quietly radical things in the entire film because it establishes, before we've seen a single frame of Barbie Land, before we've heard a single joke, before Ryan Gosling has done a single Ken thing, the actual stakes of what we're watching. This is a movie about what it means to have a self. About what it costs to be a woman in a world that can't decide what it wants from you. About the gap between the story you're given and the story you actually want to live. And it's wrapped in a Barbie costume. And then we're in Barbie Land. Oh, Barbie Land. Production designer Sarah Greenwood and her team built something genuinely extraordinary here. A world that is simultaneously a perfect recreation of Barbie's various historical playsets and a deeply, cleverly artificial construction. Everything in Barbie Land is slightly too bright, slightly too saturated, slightly too pink. The houses have no fourth wall, the dream house is open to the sky, a dollhouse logic made real. The ocean is flat and painted. The food is plastic. The showers have no water. The cars go places, but the roads are infinite loops of nowhere. It is a world of pure surfaces, pure performance, pure appearance. And it is, For the Barbies who live there, paradise. We open on a perfect Barbieland morning. The sun is always shining. The sky is always that specific technicolor blue that doesn't exist in nature, but lives permanently in the human imagination as sky. And Margot Robbie's Barbie. Stereotypical Barbie, the original, the one with the perfect beach wave hair and the perfect pink everything. Wakes up in her dream house bed, which sits open to the morning air on the second floor of a house that has no walls, and she is impossibly, radiantly, aggressively perfect. She brushes teeth that don't need brushing. She showers in water that doesn't exist. She puts on clothes that are already perfect. She greets the Barbies in neighboring dream houses. A Dr. Barbie, a lawyer Barbie, a President Barbie, a Nobel Prize Barbie. And every single one of them is thriving, accomplished, powerful, and also coincidentally having an amazing hair day. And this is important. This is a detail the film is very deliberate about. In Barbieland, all the Barbies hold all the powerful positions. The Barbies are the doctors and the lawyers and the presidents and the Nobel laureates. The Kens, Ryan Gosling's Ken, Simu Liu's Ken, a dozen other Kens, exist in a kind of pleasant ambient irrelevance. They hang out on the beach. They try to impress the Barbies. They don't have jobs exactly or houses of their own or any particular purpose beyond being around, being decorative, being enthusiastic and available and slightly confused about their own existence. Ken's job, Gosling's Ken will tell us later, with devastating specificity, is beach. The Barbies don't pay much attention to the Kens. They have their own beautiful, accomplished lives. They have their girls' night parties, the single greatest party in cinematic history, an insane, joyful musical explosion of pink and friendship and dancing that you will be thinking about for weeks after seeing it. And they have their careers and their dreams and their perfect daily routines. And stereotypical Barbie has a boyfriend, Ken. He is very enthusiastic about this. She is pleasant about it. She likes him. She thinks he's nice. But she also has a lot going on, and Ken is not exactly a priority. This dynamic is played for comedy, and it absolutely lands as comedy. But it's also doing something specific. It's asking you to notice how it feels to watch someone be treated as a pleasant accessory rather than a central figure in the story. It's asking you to notice that feeling from the other direction. To feel the discomfort of watching Ken, kind, eager, emotionally available Ken, be gently, cheerfully, completely overlooked. This will matter later. This will matter enormously later. But for now, it's paradise. For now, it's perfect. For now. And then something goes wrong. It happens at that perfect girls' night party, in the middle of a dance sequence that should be the happiest moment in the film. Barbie is dancing. She is perfect. Everything is perfect. And then, for just a second, just a single, impossible, inexplicable second, she asks a question. Does anyone ever think about dying? Silence. Record scratch. Everyone stares. Barbie doesn't know why she said it. Nobody in Barbieland thinks about dying. Dying is not something that happens in Barbieland. Death is not a concept that has any purchase in this perfect, plastic, endless paradise. But now she's thought it, and she can't unthink it. The next morning, something is wrong with Barbie. Small things at first. Her foot, which has always curved in the perfect arc of a high heel, pressed always to the point of wearing heels with no discomfort, suddenly flattens. For just a moment, she looks down at it. She looks up. She tries to shake it off. And then in the shower, the water is cold. And then the milk in her cereal is expired. And then she falls. Not gracefully, not cinematically. She just falls off the top of her dream house, where she usually floats down in a perfect arc, drifting like a living doll to the ground below. This time she doesn't float. This time she drops. She hits the ground with a thud and a ow that is simultaneously hilarious and oddly heartbreaking. Something is wrong with Barbie. And Barbieland doesn't have a framework for something being wrong with Barbie. The other Barbies send her to Weird Barbie. Oh, Weird Barbie. Kate McKinnon plays Weird Barbie, and if there is a more perfectly cast role in this film, in any film of this decade, I haven't found it. Weird Barbie lives alone at the edge of Barbieland, in a house that is chaotic and cluttered and covered in stickers. A dream house that looks like it's been loved too hard by too many children over too many years. Her hair sticks out in every direction. Her face has been drawn on with marker. Her legs bend at angles that legs should not bend. She does deep, impossible splits on the floor and offers advice and exists on the absolute margins of this perfect world. She is, in other words, the Barbie that got played with too much. The Barbie who got lived in, who got real, who got the markers and the scissors and the creative improvements that children make when they love something too roughly. And she is the wisest person in Barbieland. Weird Barbie gives Barbie a choice. She opens her hands. In one, a sparkly high heel, which represents staying in Barbieland, forgetting what happened, going back to the perfect life. In the other, a flat, slightly scuffed Birkenstock, which represents going to the real world, finding the child who is playing with her, and fixing whatever is broken. It's a direct homage to the Matrix, the red pill and the blue pill, and it's very funny and also, underneath the humor, completely sincere. Because this is actually what the movie is about. The choice between comfortable unreality and uncomfortable truth. The choice between a perfect surface and a real self. Barbie takes the Birkenstock, and Ken stows away in her car, because Ken's job is beach and his other job, apparently, is being wherever Barbie is. The transition to the real world is one of the film's most visually inventive sequences. A journey through layers of reality that manages to be both abstractly beautiful and genuinely funny, as Barbie and Ken arrive, gradually, into a world that is nothing like what either of them was prepared for. They land in Venice Beach, California, and everything is different. Everything is bigger and noisier and less organized and more complicated and far less pink than anything they've ever encountered. Barbie's first experience of the real world is not positive. A group of older men on the boardwalk ogle her, make comments, invade her space. She, who has never experienced anything like this in Barbieland where she is powerful and respected and central, is horrified. She punches one of them. She is wildly impressed with herself for punching him. The film has a lot of fun with this, but Ken's first experience of the real world is different. Ken walks around Venice Beach and starts noticing something. Something strange and exciting and confusing. He keeps seeing men. Men in charge of things. Men being taken seriously. Men who exist not as peripheral accessories to women's stories, but as the main characters. Men who have jobs that aren't beach. Men who have power and authority and presence and importance. Ken has never seen this before. Ken is fascinated. This is the moment, quiet, almost throwaway, buried under the comedy of the Venice Beach sequence, where the film plants the seed of its most complicated and philosophically interesting subplot. Because what Ken is discovering isn't just patriarchy exists. What Ken is discovering is that there is a world where someone who looks like him, where someone who has always been an afterthought, an accessory, a nice-to-have, is treated like he matters. And that feeling, for Ken, is intoxicating in a way he doesn't yet have words for. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. Because first, Barbie needs to find the child who's been playing with her. She assumes it's a little girl. She goes to Mattel headquarters, which is in Los Angeles, conveniently, and which is presented in the film as a glossy corporate palace staffed almost entirely by men in expensive suits making decisions about the world's most iconic female toy. The joke here is broad and pointed and lands perfectly. Will Ferrell plays the CEO of Mattel with the cheerful, oblivious confidence of a man who has never once questioned his own authority, and the board of directors he presides over is a magnificent, absurd parade of identically dressed male mediocrity. But Barbie doesn't find a little girl. She finds Gloria. America Ferrera's Gloria is the heart of this film. Not Barbie, not Ken, not even Greta Gerwig's thematic ambitions. America Ferrera's Gloria is where the movie's soul actually lives. She is a Mattel employee, a mother, a woman who has spent her whole life trying to be enough and finding, quietly, consistently, exhaustingly, that enough is a target that keeps moving. She is funny and warm and real in a way that grounds the entire film every time she's on screen. And she's the one who's been playing with Barbie. Except she's not a little girl. She's a grown woman. She's been playing with a Barbie. A forgotten Barbie she found in her daughter's room, because she needed to, because something in her needed the tactile comfort of that familiar plastic, needed to dress and redress a tiny figure in tiny clothes, needed, maybe, to control something small in a life that had started to feel overwhelming and large. And her daughter, Sasha, played with sharp, specific brilliance by Ariana Greenblatt, is a teenager who has not had much nice to say about Barbie recently, who has, in fact, spent considerable time writing essays about how Barbie is responsible for the destruction of multiple generations of women's self-image, who confronts our Barbie in the Mattel cafeteria with a righteous fury that is both completely understandable and slightly devastating. You've been making women feel bad about themselves since 1959, Sasha says, or something to that effect. And Barbie, who genuinely doesn't know this, who has never had access to this information, who believed with her whole heart that she was making the world better, is crushed by it. The look on Robbie's face in this moment is extraordinary. It is the look of someone whose entire understanding of herself has just been dismantled in a sentence. Meanwhile, Ken has been doing research. Ken, who wandered off during the Mattel chaos, has discovered the internet, has discovered history, has discovered horses. Ken becomes briefly, magnificently obsessed with horses in a way the film never fully explains and doesn't need to. It's perfect, and most significantly has discovered patriarchy. Ken has discovered that there exists or existed a version of the world in which men are in charge, are always in charge, are assumed to be in charge, where they hold all the power and make all the decisions and their opinions are the ones that matter and their comfort is the thing that everything is arranged around. And Ken, who has spent his entire existence as a pleasant background detail in Barbie's story, thinks this sounds incredible. He goes back to Barbieland ahead of Barbie. He brings books. He brings the concept. He starts explaining it to the other Kens. And the other Kens, equally anchorless, equally undefined, equally hungry for some kind of identity that isn't just Barbie's Ken, are immediately, enthusiastically on board. What happens next is one of the most brilliantly structured sequences in the film. The Kens take over Barbieland while the Barbies are distracted, manipulated, flattered into compliance. Ken introduces the concept of the patriarchy and the Kens implement it with the specific, chaotic enthusiasm of people who have just discovered a new game and don't entirely understand the rules but are very excited about the aesthetic. The dream houses become man caves. The Barbies, suddenly, are serving snacks and listening to mansplaining and asking the Kens for their opinions. The Kens have taken over all the powerful positions. The Barbies have been decorativized, made peripheral, made nice. There is a song. Ryan Gosling performs it. It is called I'm Just Ken. It is one of the greatest, most ridiculous, most genuinely moving comedy songs in the history of movie musicals. It is also, underneath the comedy, a real song about loneliness, about wanting to matter, about the specific ache of being defined entirely in relation to someone else. Gosling performs it with a commitment that transcends parody. He is fully in it, emotionally present, technically magnificent, clearly having the absolute time of his life, and the result is something that shouldn't work as profoundly as it does. I'm just Ken / anywhere else I'd be 10 out of 10. The line lands as comedy and as truth simultaneously. Because Ken isn't wrong that he would be different somewhere else. Ken isn't wrong that Barbieland has not given him the space to figure out who he is. The film is generous enough to hold both things at once, to let Ken's patriarchy cosplay be absurd and critiqued while also acknowledging the genuine emotional wound underneath it. That's one of the things that makes Barbie so much more interesting than it had any obligation to be. It doesn't flatten Ken into a villain. It understands him, feels sorry for him. It lets him be wrong and sympathetic at the exact same time. Barbie, Gloria, and Sasha arrive back in Barbieland to find everything changed. This is a devastating sequence. Barbie walks through her dream house, her home, the space that is supposed to be entirely hers, and finds it transformed. Ken's stuff everywhere. The Kens have been invited to live with the Barbies, and the Barbies themselves are different, glazed, compliant, serving beers and rubbing shoulders and agreeing with things they would never have agreed with before, smiling with a vacancy that is genuinely unsettling to watch. Barbie tries to wake them up. They don't wake up. They look at her like she's saying something strange. And then Barbie falls apart a little. Because it's not just that Barbieland has changed. It's that Barbie is realizing, for the first time, how fragile it all was. How thin the membrane of that perfect world. How quickly everything she believed about herself and her world and her purpose can be dismantled, reshaped, repurposed by someone who had a different idea. Robbie plays this collapse with extraordinary restraint. It's not a big scene. It's not a dramatic monologue. It's just the specific, quiet devastation of someone who has just understood something terrible about the world, and about herself, and about the gap between what we're told we are and what we actually are. Gloria is the one who figures out how to fight back. Not through force, not through some magical reversal, but through consciousness, through language, through the radical act of saying true things out loud. She gives a speech, and this is where the film becomes something that people will be remembering for a very long time. Gloria's speech, America Ferrera's monologue about what it means to be a woman, about the impossible, contradictory, exhausting tightrope that women are asked to walk every single day of their lives, is the emotional center of the entire movie. It is the moment where all the comedy and the satire and the visual inventiveness and the cultural commentary converge into something that is just true, just nakedly, painfully, immediately true. She talks about the contradictions, how you have to be confident but not too confident, ambitious but not threatening, beautiful but effortlessly so, thin but not obsessively, successful but not so successful that it makes people uncomfortable. How you have to take up space but not too much space. How you have to be interested in men's opinions but not desperate for them. How you are told you can be anything, do anything, become anything, and then the moment you try, you find 100 invisible walls that nobody warned you about. It's not a speech about Barbie exactly. It's a speech that uses Barbie, the icon, the impossible standard, the thing we give to little girls and say, this is what a woman looks like, as a lens for something much larger and much older and much more personal. And the Barbies in Barbieland hear it. And they start to remember. They start to wake up. Not dramatically, not all at once, but in the way that real recognition works. Slowly, like a light coming on behind someone's eyes. This is how the Barbies are saved. Not by a hero with a weapon or a plan with 100 steps. By a woman standing in a plastic world and saying the truth out loud. The restoration of Barbieland is complicated and funny, and involves a subplot about splitting the Ken vote that is simultaneously a pointed satire of political manipulation and a genuinely clever piece of comedy plotting. But the important thing, the thing that the film spends the rest of its runtime working through, is what happens after. Because Barbie Land is restored. The Barbies are back in power. The Kens have their own journey of self-discovery ahead. Their own process of figuring out who they are when they're not defined by opposition or possession. Ken and Barbie have a conversation. A real one. Maybe the first real one they've ever had. And Ken tells her, with a vulnerability that Gosling plays completely straight and completely beautifully, that he doesn't know who he is without her. That he's been Ken, Barbie's boyfriend, for so long that he doesn't have a self outside of that relationship. And Barbie says, gently, honestly, with the specific kindness of someone who genuinely cares about someone and is also being clear, that she can't be the answer to that question for him. That he needs to figure out who Ken is. Not Ken, Barbie's Ken. Just Ken. It's a breakup scene that is played entirely without malice or cruelty. And it is oddly, quietly devastating in a way that real breakup scenes often aren't. Because both of them are right. Because both of them deserve something better than what they've been giving each other. Because the relationship they had wasn't a relationship at all, it was a dynamic. A habit. A set of roles. And the film is generous enough to give Ken the beginning of something real at the end. He gets to say his own name. He gets to exist. That's the start. But the bigger question, the question that has been building under everything else in the film since that first cold shower, since that first flat foot, since that first whispered thought about death, is what happens to Barbie. What does Barbie do now? The Mattel executives want her to go back. They want her to return to Barbie Land and be what she's always been. The system that made her wants to preserve her as she was, wants to put her back in the box, wants to close the lid. And Barbie herself isn't sure what she wants. Because she has tasted something in the real world. She has felt the cold shower. She has experienced pain and confusion and the terrible, exhilarating discomfort of not knowing. And something in her, some new, fragile human thing, doesn't want to give that back. The film's climax involves a conversation between Barbie and Ruth Handler, the creator of Barbie, the woman who invented her, played here by Rhea Perlman with a quiet warmth that feels exactly right. And in this conversation, which takes place in a sort of liminal space outside both Barbie Land and the real world, Ruth offers Barbie a choice. She can go back to Barbie Land. She can be Barbie forever. She can be perfect and safe and immortal and plastic and protected from everything that hurts. Or she can choose to be human. Not a Barbie human, with a perfect body and a perfect wardrobe. Just human. With all of it. With the mortality and the uncertainty and the wrinkles and the bad days and the slow, aching, beautiful process of figuring out who you actually are when nobody's watching. And Barbie, our Barbie, stereotypical Barbie, the original, chooses to be human. Ruth shows her things. Shows her memories. Other people's memories. Flashes of real human life. Real women's lives. The messy and beautiful and complicated reality of being a person in the world. Moments of joy so specific they ache. Moments of grief so honest they break you open a little. The ordinary, irreplaceable miracle of being alive and being mortal and being real. And Barbie cries. Margot Robbie cries in this scene. And it is one of those acting moments that you remember not because it's theatrical but because it's so completely, plainly real. She sits with these images of humanity washing over her. And she cries the way someone cries when they understand, for the first time, what they've been missing. What they've never been allowed to have. What they actually want. She chooses to be human. She becomes Barbara Handler. The name is the name of Ruth Handler's daughter, and it is also, quietly, movingly, the original source of the name Barbie. A loop the film closes with the specific grace of a story that has known, from the beginning, exactly where it was going. The final scene of the film is Barbie, Barbara Handler now, in human clothes with human nerves, going to the gynecologist. It is hilarious. It is also in the specific register that this whole film operates in completely perfect. Because going to the gynecologist is not a glamorous thing. It is not a pink thing. It is not a thing that happens in commercials or on billboards or in the impossible idealized world of a toy's mythology. It is just a mundane, real, necessary thing that women do. A thing that belongs to the body. A thing that says, I am here, I am in this body, I am real. And Barbara Handler, erstwhile Barbie, formerly perfect, formerly plastic, formerly immune to time and death and cold showers and uncomfortable thoughts, walks into that doctor's office with a smile on her face. Not a Barbie smile, a real one, uncertain and a little nervous and completely human. The film ends there. It ends on that smile. What does Barbie actually mean? What is it actually doing? Let's sit with this for a moment. Let's not rush past it. Because there are a dozen different things happening in this film simultaneously, and the reason it resonated with so many different people in so many different ways is that each of those people found their particular door into it. For some viewers, the film is straightforwardly a feminist text. It is a movie about the impossible expectations placed on women. Expectations so deeply internalized that they're invisible until something shakes loose, until a crack appears in the perfect surface, until you find yourself asking at a party about death and realizing that the question has been waiting inside you for a very long time. The film says, those expectations are real. They are exhausting, and there is another way to live, but you have to be willing to lose the perfection in order to find it. For some viewers, the film is a meditation on identity, on what it means to have a self, on the terror and the freedom of being undefined. Ken's arc, in particular, speaks to anyone who has ever defined themselves primarily in relation to another person, who has been someone's partner, someone's child, someone's employee, someone's audience, and suddenly found themselves in a room alone wondering who's there. The film says, that's scary and it's supposed to be scary, and figuring it out is the actual work of being alive. For some viewers, the film is about the relationship between commerce and culture. Mattel, and by extension all of consumer capitalism, gets satirized with a pointed but not cruel pen. The joke about the Mattel boardroom full of men making decisions about women's toys is funny and true. The film is aware of its own contradictions. It is, after all, a Warner Brothers film produced with Mattel's cooperation, a piece of corporate entertainment critiquing the system that made it. And it seems genuinely to be okay with that, to be saying yes and, can a thing be made by a machine and still say something true? Can a product be sold and still have a soul? The answer the film offers is, maybe, with enough of the right people making the right choices for the right reasons. For some viewers, particularly for women of a certain age, women who grew up with Barbie and who have complicated feelings about her, the film is a kind of reconciliation. An acknowledgement that Barbie is not simply good or simply bad, that she represents both the prison and the aspiration, that the little girls who smashed their baby dolls in the opening sequence were responding to something real, a genuine expansion of possibility, however flawed, however commercialized, however pink, even as the standard she represented was also doing damage. The film holds all of this. It doesn't resolve the contradictions. It lets them coexist. It says, something can be imperfect and still matter. Something can be limited and still be liberating. Something can be plastic and still, somehow, contain something real. Let's talk about Greta Gerwig for a moment. Because we have to. Because the most remarkable thing about Barbie, when you step back and look at it as a piece of filmmaking, is the control. The absolute, unnerving precision of it. Every choice in this film is a choice. The brightness of the pink is a choice. The flatness of the ocean is a choice. The moment when the color starts to shift, when the film's palette begins to bleed towards something less saturated, less certain, that's a choice. The way the comedy and the sadness are always right next to each other, always bumping up against each other, never quite letting you settle into one register, that's a choice. Gerwig has made 2 films before this that were critically acclaimed and deeply beloved, and both of them, Lady Bird and Little Women, share DNA with Barbie in ways that become more visible in retrospect. They're all films about girls becoming women, about the moment when the self you were given starts to feel too small for the self you're becoming, about the specific grief of realizing that the story you were told about your life is not the story you actually want to live. In Lady Bird, it's about a girl in Sacramento who wants to be somewhere else and doesn't yet know that somewhere else is not the answer to the question she's actually asking. In Little Women, it's about the tension between a woman's creative ambition and the world's insistence that she redirect that ambition into more domestically appropriate channels. And in Barbie, it's about all of that and also about the specific strange experience of being an icon, of having a self that has been projected onto and defined by and argued about by millions of other people for 60 years before you ever got to say a word about it. That's a specific kind of uncanny experience, and Gerwig uses the Barbie IP to explore it with a precision that shouldn't be possible within a studio franchise blockbuster but somehow is. The collaboration with Noah Baumbach on the screenplay is worth noting too. Baumbach's voice, precise, a little cold, always looking for the uncomfortable truth in the domestic moment, levens the warmth that Gerwig naturally brings. The script is funnier than it should be and sadder than it looks and more structurally intricate than a movie about a doll has any reason to be. The jokes land, the emotions land, and they land in the same sentences often, which is one of the hardest things in the world to actually pull off. Let's talk about Margot Robbie, because the discussion of Barbie cannot be complete without a sincere, extended appreciation of what Margot Robbie does in this film. And I want to start with this. The performance is much harder than it looks. Playing perfect is genuinely one of the most difficult things you can ask an actor to do, because perfection has no texture, no roughness, no grain, and without those things, without something to grip, the audience slides off the surface of a character without ever feeling like they've really seen them. What Robbie does, what makes her performance extraordinary rather than merely excellent, is find the texture inside the perfection. The specific way Barbie holds herself, the particular quality of her smile, the moment when the smile starts to mean something different than it looks. These are incredibly fine-grained choices made with extraordinary precision. You believe completely and immediately that this person has never had a bad day. And then you believe completely and gradually that she is beginning to understand what a bad day is. And the transition between those two things, the crack in the surface, the flat foot, the cold shower, is some of the finest physical and emotional acting in recent memory. The scene where Ruth shows her the memories of human life, where she cries, is the scene that, for many viewers, broke the film open for them. Because up until that point, the film has been clever and funny and visually inventive and thematically interesting, but it's been operating at a slight remove. The comedy has kept you at arm's length, just far enough away that you're smiling rather than crying. And then Robbie does that thing and the arm's length collapses and you're just there with her, feeling exactly what she's feeling, and you realize you've been feeling it for a while and didn't quite know it. That's when people started reaching for each other's hands in the dark. And Ryan Gosling. Ryan Gosling as Ken is a performance that belongs in a different category than most comedic performances because it's not, strictly speaking, a comedic performance. It's a sincere performance of a character who happens to be very funny. The distinction matters. Gosling is not winking. He is not playing, "Isn't this silly?" He is playing Ken, the specific, limited, emotionally hungry, desperately enthusiastic person with complete earnestness, and the comedy comes from the collision between that earnestness and the reality surrounding him. The "I'm just Ken" sequence is the film's showstopper in terms of pure cinematic spectacle, and it's impossible to watch without thinking about what a specific, unusual choice it was to make it work the way it works. The song is big and ridiculous, and the staging is enormous, and the sequins are impressive. And Gosling sings it like it's the most important song he's ever sung. Like it's not a comedy number at all. Like it's a real, raw expression of genuine longing. And because he plays it that way, it is, That's the magic trick. The film asks you to laugh at Ken and feel for Ken simultaneously, and Gosling makes you do both at once, without transition, without warning, without making it feel like a manipulation. You just find yourself doing it. You find yourself laughing at this man in sequins singing about being overlooked, and then you find yourself quietly moved by this man in sequins singing about being overlooked, and the laugh and the moved feeling exist at the same time in the same body, and you don't know quite what to do with that. It's a remarkable piece of work. It deserved far more awards recognition than it received. America Ferrera. The speech. We've mentioned the speech. But let's actually sit with it, because the speech doesn't exist in a vacuum. It exists at the end of an entire performance that has been quietly, consistently, beautifully building toward it. Gloria is the film's audience surrogate in a very specific sense. She is the viewer who came to the movie carrying complicated feelings about Barbie, who grew up with her, who has a messy relationship with what Barbie represented. She is a woman in the middle of her life who is tired, who is doing her best, who loves her daughter and is confused by her daughter and is trying to find the connection that used to feel easy and now feels elusive, who is, under everything, a person who has been performing a version of herself for so long that she's not always sure what's performance and what's real. And Ferrera plays all of this with such restraint and such specificity that the speech, when it comes, doesn't feel like a set piece. It feels like a release. Like something that has been building pressure in a container for the entire film and has finally, gratefully, been allowed out. The monologue is written beautifully, but the writing could be squandered. What Ferrera brings to it is the sense that these words are costing her something to say. That each one has been sitting in her chest for a long time and is being pulled out of her by necessity rather than delivered by design. That's the difference between an actress performing a feminist monologue and an actress inhabiting a woman who is, in this specific moment, unable to not say these things. It's an Oscar-caliber piece of work. The fact that she received a nomination for it is appropriate. The fact that she didn't win it is one of those industry decisions that will look increasingly strange over time. Let's talk about what didn't quite work. Because in the interest of honesty, and because the film itself is honest enough to deserve honest criticism, there are places where Barbie's ambitions outrun its execution. The Mattel satire, while funny, is the thinnest part of the film. Will Ferrell's CEO character gets laughs but never gets depth. He's a satirical sketch rather than a character, and the sequences inside Mattel headquarters, while enjoyable, sit somewhat uneasily alongside the more emotionally complex material surrounding them. They're broad in a way the rest of the film isn't, and the tonal whiplash is occasionally jarring. The film also, at times, over-explains itself. The themes are rich enough and the storytelling strong enough that some of the more on-the-nose moments of explicit thematic statement feel slightly redundant. The closing voiceover, in particular, does some work that the images have already done. It says aloud things that the film has already communicated visually and emotionally, and the result is a slight over-insistence on meaning in a film that has done a remarkable job of embedding that meaning in scene and character and image. And the resolution of the Ken storyline, while emotionally satisfying in terms of the character's journey, is structurally a little abrupt. Ken gets his realization, his Kens get their new identity. Just Ken doing things that aren't Beach. And then we're on to the Barbara Handler ending. And while each of these things works individually, the transition between them is faster than it should be for emotional moments of this magnitude. These are not fatal flaws. They are the flaws of a film that is trying to do so much, so ambitiously, at such a scale, that some seams are inevitably showing. The ambition itself is the point. And the ambition is, on balance, more than justified by how often and how deeply it succeeds. The cinematography, by Rodrigo Prieto, deserves its own extended conversation. Prieto is one of the great cinematographers working in Hollywood, with a body of work that includes Brokeback Mountain, The Wolf of Wall Street, Silence, and Marriage Story. Films with wildly different visual vocabularies that speak to an extraordinary range and adaptability. For Barbie, He created something that looks unlike any of those films and also unlike anything else in recent mainstream cinema. The visual language of Barbieland is, paradoxically, both maximally artificial and somehow warm. The colors are pushed, hot pinks and electric blues and saturated yellows that don't exist in nature but feel immediately right in this world. The lighting is always slightly too perfect, slightly too even, slightly too flattering. A world where shadows don't quite work the way they should, where the light always knows where to be for the best effect. And then, as the film progresses and Barbie's journey takes her into more uncertain territory, the color temperature shifts. The saturation drops incrementally, almost imperceptibly. The light becomes slightly more honest. By the time we reach the film's emotional climax, Ruth's garden, the human memories, the choice, the visual world has migrated from Barbieland's impossible brightness towards something that looks closer to the world we actually live in. This is filmmaking that trusts the audience to feel things without being told to feel them. That does the emotional work through image rather than instruction. It's the kind of craft that you might not consciously notice while watching, but that is responsible for a significant portion of the film's emotional effect. The real-world sequences, in contrast, are shot with a naturalism that is almost jarring after Barbieland. Real sunlight, real imperfection, the specific visual texture of Los Angeles in summer. The contrast is the point. Barbieland looks like a movie. The real world looks like the world. And Barbie, moving between the two, is learning which one she wants to live in. The soundtrack and score by Mark Ronson and Andrew Wyatt, and the accompanying album of original songs, are a significant part of why the film works as well as it does. The score is playful and warm and slightly melancholy underneath the playfulness. It has the quality of a music box, something mechanical and lovely and just slightly sad. It underscores the film's emotional subtext without pushing it into the foreground, which is exactly what a score for a film this tonally complex needs to do. The songs are extraordinary, and that is not a word I use lightly. Billie Eilish's What Was I Made For? Is the emotional gut punch of the film's audio landscape, a song that does something that very few tie-in songs manage to do, which is feel like it genuinely emerged from the film's themes rather than being grafted onto them from the outside. It's a question that Barbie is asking throughout the film, and hearing it asked in Eilish's specific, delicate, devastating vocal register is one of those perfect conjunctions of image and music and emotion that you don't plan and you can't manufacture. The song won the Academy Award for Best Original Song. It deserved to. It's the kind of song that you find yourself singing in the shower 6 months later without having meant to learn it, and then you're crying in the shower because you've remembered why it means what it means. I'm Just Ken is a different kind of accomplishment. A song that is genuinely funny and genuinely catchy and somehow also genuinely moving, and that manages to be all three things simultaneously rather than cycling between them. Gosling performed it live at the Academy Awards, in a sequence that may be the most joyful thing to happen on that stage in the last decade. Let's talk about the film's relationship to Mattel, because it's strange and interesting and worth examining. Mattel, as a company, was a co-producer of this film. They signed off on a movie that, at several points, explicitly critiques the damage done by their flagship product, mocks the corporate structure of their company, and portrays their CEO as a genial buffoon. This seems, from the outside, like an extraordinary act of corporate self-awareness or, depending on how cynical you are, an extraordinary act of corporate image rehabilitation dressed up as self-awareness. And both things might be true at once. Gerwig has spoken in interviews about the conversation she had with Mattel about the film's content, about the things she was and wasn't allowed to include, about the negotiations involved in making a film that critiques an IP while being financed in part by the owners of that IP. She's been characteristically diplomatic about it, and it's probably wise to read between the lines and assume that there were compromises made on both sides. But here's what I'd say about it. The critique lands. It lands clearly, it lands with intelligence, and it's not defanged by its context. The film genuinely says something critical about what Barbie represents, about the damage done by impossible beauty standards, about the way the toy industry has participated in shaping female self-image in ways that haven't always been kind. And it says those things while being made with Mattel's cooperation and branded with Mattel's IP. Is that a contradiction? Yes. Is the contradiction itself kind of the point? Also, yes. The film is about the impossibility of existing outside the systems that made you, about the compromises involved in trying to say something true within a structure that benefits from things staying the way they are. And the fact that the film was made within exactly those constraints is either deeply ironic or sort of brilliantly self-referential, depending on where you're standing. Maybe both. Let's talk about the cultural moment. Barbie arrived in the summer of 2023 at a specific conjunction of cultural pressures. Women's rights were under significant assault in the United States. The Dobbs decision had come the previous summer, rolling back federal abortion protections, and the public conversation about what women are allowed to do with their bodies, their careers, their ambitions, their very lives was loud and painful and ongoing. The conversation about representation in Hollywood, about who gets to make movies, who gets to tell stories, whose stories get told, was also very much alive. And into this moment walked a movie about a doll. Pink movie. Fun movie. A movie that was being marketed as a movie about a doll having fun adventures. Except it wasn't that. And people knew it wasn't that, and they came to it in extraordinary numbers, and they sat with it, and they laughed, and they cried, and they drove home in silence, and they texted their mothers, and they called their daughters, and they talked about it for months. The cultural conversation that Barbie generated, the op-eds, the essays, the TikToks, the arguments, the think pieces, the counter-think pieces, was itself a kind of ongoing cultural event. People argued about whether the film was feminist enough, whether it was feminist at all, whether it was too feminist, whether it was corporate feminism dressed up as the real thing, whether it was anti-men, whether it was pro-men, whether Ken deserved better, whether Barbie deserved better, whether the ending was a cop-out, whether the ending was exactly right. All of this arguing was itself evidence that the film had done something, had touched something, had said something that people needed to argue about because it was too close to things they actually felt and believed and disagreed about. That's what art does when it's working. It gives you a container for the argument that's already inside you. There's a moment in the film that I keep coming back to. It's not one of the famous scenes. It's not the speech or the song or the final choice or the gynecologist. It's a smaller moment, easy to miss if you're not paying attention. It's the moment when Barbie, in the real world for the first time, sits on a bench in Venice Beach after the encounter with the old men who leered at her. And she sits next to an older woman, an ordinary woman, not beautiful by Hollywood standards, not young, just a person sitting on a bench in the sun. And Barbie looks at her and tells her she's beautiful. And the woman looks slightly embarrassed and slightly moved and slightly confused. And she says something like, "I know." It's a tiny moment. It takes maybe 15 seconds of screen time. But it's doing something the rest of the film doesn't have to do because this moment does it for everything. It says that the beauty that matters, the beauty that endures, the beauty that is actually beautiful is not Barbie's kind. Not the perfect, constructed, manufactured, plastic kind. It's the kind that just is. That exists in a person sitting in the sun on a Tuesday, living their ordinary, imperfect, mortal life. And Barbie recognizes it. For the first time, she recognizes something she couldn't have recognized before. Because she's starting to change. That's the film in one moment, if you need one moment to carry with you. A comparison briefly to other films in the conversation. Barbie is inevitably compared to The Truman Show, another film about a person discovering that the perfect world they inhabit is constructed, artificial, and controlled by forces they weren't aware of. The comparison is apt. Both films are about the courage required to leave certainty for reality, to choose truth over comfort. But The Truman Show's emotional register is darker, more paranoid, more explicitly about surveillance and control. Barbie is more generously disposed toward its creators. Ruth Handler, as depicted here, is not a villain but a mother figure of sorts, someone who genuinely cares about what she made even if she couldn't fully control what it became. It's also compared, inevitably, to other high-concept feminist Hollywood films, Legally Blonde, Miss Congeniality, the recent wave of female-led comedies that have tried to do something with the conventions of the genre. But Barbie is operating at a different register than most of those. It's not a story about proving yourself in a world that underestimates you. It's a story about something harder and stranger and more fundamental, about what you are when you're stripped of the role you've always been assigned, and whether the self that's left is enough. The closest analog, for me, is Synecdoche, New York, Charlie Kaufman's massive, terrifying, beautiful meditation on identity and mortality and the impossibility of ever fully knowing yourself. Both films are about the panic of self-examination, the terror and the liberation of recognizing yourself as a constructed thing. But Kaufman arrives at despair, and Gerwig arrives at something kinder, at the gynecologist, at the ordinary, irreplaceable miracle of being alive in a body that will eventually stop working, and choosing it anyway. That's a different kind of courage. The film's relationship to mortality deserves its own extended meditation, because it's one of the things that sneaks up on you. It starts with Barbie's question at the party, "Does anyone ever think about dying?" And it's played as a joke, a non sequitur, something transgressive in its inappropriateness to the setting. But the question doesn't leave. It echoes through everything that follows. What does it mean to be immortal? What does it mean to be permanent? What does it mean to exist in a state of perfect, unvarying sameness, to wake up every morning to the same perfect face, the same perfect house, the same perfect life, with no possibility of change, no direction to grow in, no time to move through? The film is suggesting that immortality, perfect immortality, might not be the paradise it sounds like. Might be, in a specific way, a kind of death, the death of possibility, the death of becoming, the death of the self that is always in process, always changing, always being made and remade by time and experience. To choose to be human is to choose to be mortal, to choose death in a sense. And yet the film presents it as the choice in favor of life. The choice toward more life, more realness, more presence in the world, even knowing, maybe especially knowing, that it won't last. It's a beautiful idea. It's an ancient idea, actually. It's the idea behind Achilles choosing a short life of glory over a long life of nothing much, behind Eve choosing knowledge over innocence, behind every story about a divine being who chooses to become human because being human, with all its suffering and all its limitation, is somehow worth it. Greta Gerwig puts this ancient idea in a pink dream house and a vinyl jumpsuit and makes it feel completely fresh. The ending. Let's sit with the ending one more time. Barbara Handler walks into the gynecologist's office. She is nervous. She is real. She is ordinary. She is magnificent. The film ends. And what lingers, what stays with you as the credits roll and the Billie Eilish song fills the theater, is not the jokes, though the jokes are very good, and not the spectacle, though the spectacle is extraordinary, and not the themes, though the themes are rich and worthy and carefully assembled. What lingers is the feeling of having watched someone choose themselves. Choose the imperfect, uncertain, mortal, real version of themselves over the safe, static, perfect, plastic version. And maybe you recognize that choice. Maybe you've been offered a version of it yourself. Not in those terms, not in pink, not with a sparkly Birkenstock in one hand. But the fundamental question is not so different from questions that show up in ordinary human lives all the time. The question of whether to stay in the story you were given or to write your own. The question of whether the thing that feels safe is actually good, or whether it's just familiar. The question of what you'd choose if choosing was real and the consequences were real and the life on the other side was yours to actually live. And the film's answer, Barbara Handler's answer, Greta Gerwig's answer, is choose the real thing. Even if it's cold. Even if it hurts. Even if you have to go to the gynecologist. Choose the real thing. Let me give you a final rating. And I want to think through it seriously, because Barbie deserves serious consideration as a film rather than just as a cultural event. The technical craft is extraordinary. The performance from Robbie is one of the finest comedic dramatic performances in recent memory, and Gosling delivers a career best in a supporting role that most actors would have played for easy laughs. America Ferrera gives the film its emotional core. The script is wickedly smart. The direction is in complete control. The production design is a major artistic achievement. The cinematography is precisely calibrated to serve the story's emotional arc. The songs are excellent. The film's ambition to be simultaneously a crowd-pleasing blockbuster and a genuinely thoughtful feminist text and a meditation on mortality and identity and the gap between who we're told to be and who we actually are, is not just impressive but largely achieved. The weaknesses are real but minor. Some over-explanation, some tonal unevenness in the Mattel satire sequences, a slightly rushed conclusion to Ken's storyline. These are the flaws of a film that bit off an enormous amount and chewed most of it. My rating, 9 out of 10. Not 10. Not because it didn't earn 10 in some of its individual moments, it did repeatedly, but because the whole doesn't quite achieve the perfect integration of its parts that a 10 requires. There are seams showing in places. There are moments where you can see the machinery. But 9 out of 10 is, in a landscape where most blockbusters are aiming for 5 and mostly hitting 3, a remarkable achievement. And I'll say this, in 5 years, in 10 years, in whatever the film culture looks like from the other side of whatever is coming, Barbie is going to look more important than it does now. It's going to look like one of the films that told the truth about this moment, about what it meant to be a woman in 2023. About the impossible beauty standards and the exhausting contradictions and the way that even the things meant to help us can also constrain us. About the way freedom requires loss. About the way choosing to be real, fully, completely, messily, morally real, is an act of extraordinary courage. In a pink box, in a dream house, on a bench in Venice Beach, next to an ordinary woman who is beautiful without trying and who knows it. That's the movie. That's what it is. And if you haven't seen it yet, really seen it, really sat with it, really let it do what it's trying to do, I'd suggest you do. Bring your mother. Bring your daughter. Bring whoever it is in your life who has ever felt the cold shower of reality after a life of perfect surfaces. Bring whoever it is who has ever asked, at a party that should have been perfect, about dying. They'll understand. You'll understand. The movie knows you already. There's something I haven't talked about yet. Something that sits underneath all the obvious feminist discourse and the cultural commentary and the beautiful, aching question of what it means to choose a self. And that's the film's relationship to nostalgia. To the specific, complicated emotion of loving something that has also hurt you. Because that's what Barbie is. For so many of the people who grew up with her. She is a beloved object and a damaging one. She is the smell of new plastic and the scratch of tiny dress clasps and the specific sunlit feeling of Saturday morning with a dream house spread across the living room floor. She is also, for so many of those same people, the first internalized message about what a woman's body is supposed to look like. The first introduction to the idea that worth is tied to appearance. The first tiny arrow, aimed at the self, from a source that was supposed to be pure joy. Gerwig understands this. The film understands this. And it doesn't try to resolve it. It doesn't tell you to forgive Barbie or to condemn her. It just holds both things in the same frame and lets you feel them simultaneously. The warmth and the damage. The liberation and the limitation. The love and the complication of the love. That's actually one of the most mature things about this film. Its refusal to settle. Its willingness to end in ambiguity, in complexity, in a question that doesn't have a clean answer. The feminist text doesn't arrive at a triumphant declaration. It arrives at a gynecologist's office, which is both mundane and profound, both ordinary and a statement, both a joke and exactly right. And that ambiguity, that refusal to simplify, is what makes the film feel real despite everything that is so deliberately, thoroughly artificial about it. Let me take you back inside the film for a moment. Back to the Ken storyline, because I don't think we've spent enough time there, and I think the Ken storyline is actually one of the more philosophically interesting things the film does. Ken's arc is, on its surface, a satire of masculine fragility. He discovers patriarchy, brings it to Barbie land, implements it with the enthusiasm of someone who has found a religion, and then, when it collapses, has to figure out who he actually is when he's not defined by either power over women or devotion to one woman. It's broad, it's funny, and the I'm Just Ken number makes it both more and less than pure satire. But what the Ken storyline is actually doing at a deeper level is asking the same question the Barbie storyline is asking, just from a different angle. Both Barbie and Ken spend the film discovering that their identities are constructed, that they have been given roles rather than selves, that the world they inhabit has told them who to be and given them no tools for figuring out who they actually want to be. Barbie's role is perfect woman. Ken's role is Barbie's accessory. And both roles, however different in their cultural valence, are equally constraining, equally hollow at the center. The film is generous enough to not equate them, to not say that being Ken is as limiting as being Barbie, which would be both historically dishonest and politically inaccurate. But it is generous enough to say that Ken is also suffering, that his desperate patriarchy power trip is not cruelty but confused longing, that the thing he's reaching for, an identity, a self, a reason to exist that isn't dependent on someone else's acknowledgement, is something that everyone needs and something that Barbie land, for all its feminism, forgot to give him. There's a moment before the I'm Just Ken number, when Ken asks Barbie what he means to her, not confrontationally, genuinely, with the specific vulnerability of someone who has been asking this question quietly to themselves for a long time and has finally said it out loud. And Barbie's answer, warm, kind, and ultimately insufficient, is to say that he's Ken. He's Beach Ken. He's great. She doesn't see him. Not really. She has never really seen him. And the film is honest enough to let that be true about Barbie, who is otherwise presented sympathetically. She is capable of not seeing someone. She is capable of using someone without quite knowing she's doing it. She is, in other words, not perfect. Not even in Barbie land. This is one of the things that makes Barbie more interesting than a simple feminist fable. It doesn't create a heroine who is right about everything. It creates a heroine who is, in specific ways, as shaped and limited by her world as everyone else, and who has to do the work of recognizing that and sitting with it and trying to do better. The Barbies who aren't stereotypical Barbie are worth spending time on, because the ensemble is doing something specific, and it's easy to miss it when you're watching Robbie's magnetic performance and Gosling's joyful excess. The other Barbies, Issa Rae's President Barbie, Kate McKinnon's Weird Barbie, Emma Mackey's Physicist Barbie, Hari Neff's Dr. Barbie, and a dozen others are not just background. They're a deliberate construction of the range of possibility that Barbie has represented over 60-plus years. The Barbies of Barbie land are all that Barbie has ever claimed to be. Accomplished, powerful, capable, free. They are the aspirational version of the myth, the version that the original 1959 doll was, in her way, reaching toward. And then the Kens take over and they become, almost overnight, servile and compliant and content to be decorative. The speed of this transformation is one of the film's most pointed observations, because it doesn't take violence or legislation or dramatic upheaval to reshape a woman's sense of her own power. It takes flattery. It takes being told persistently and warmly and with great enthusiasm that this other version of you, the softer one, the more available one, the one who makes space for others rather than taking up her own space, is actually more desirable, more lovable, more appropriate. And something in the Barbies responds to that. Not because they're weak, but because the desire to be loved, to be wanted, to be valued is not weakness. It's human. And when that desire is targeted with enough precision by people who figured out how to weaponize it, even the most accomplished and powerful people can find themselves rearranged before they've noticed it happening. The film doesn't belabor this point. It doesn't lecture. It just shows it happening quickly and completely and lets you sit with the discomfort of watching it and recognizing it. There's a conversation I want to have about Kate McKinnon's Weird Barbie that I don't see happening often enough in the discourse around this film. Weird Barbie is the film's prophet. She is the one who lives outside the system, who sees it clearly because she's never been entirely inside it. She is the Barbie who got lived in too hard, loved too roughly, played with too completely, and that roughness has given her a kind of wisdom that the perfect Barbies, preserved in their boxes, can't access. This is an old story archetype, the outsider who sees what the insiders can't, the fool who speaks truth, the damaged one who is more whole than the intact ones. And McKinnon plays it with a wild, joyful, completely committed energy that is somehow also tender underneath all the absurdity. Weird Barbie chooses to live outside Barbieland's perfection. She could, presumably, get fixed, get her hair sorted, get her legs bent back to the right angles, get her marker-drawn face cleaned up. But she doesn't. She lives in her chaos house at the edge of the pink world, and she watches and she knows things. And when Barbie finally comes to her with the problem of a flattening foot and a cold shower, she knows exactly what's happening and what needs to happen next. She is the one who gives Barbie the choice. The Birkenstock or the heel, reality or safety. And there's something about the specific texture of McKinnon's performance here that is worth noticing. She plays Weird Barbie not as a figure of pity or of comic relief, but as someone who has made peace with her strangeness, who has found something in the margins that the center couldn't offer. She is, in a way, already living the life that Barbie is trying to reach. Already chosen. Already herself. The movie is very smart to put that character at the beginning, to establish, before anything else begins, that there is a version of Barbie who has already done the work, who is already on the other side of the journey, who can give directions because she's already been there. Let me talk about the color. Not in a film school technical way, in the way it actually feels when you're watching the movie. Barbieland is pink. Obviously, aggressively, magnificently, but it's a specific pink. A pink that is at once completely artificial and somehow warm. Not the cold, clinical pink of pharmaceutical packaging or the aggressive pink of certain discount stores. Something warmer and softer and more nostalgic. The pink of memory. The pink of childhood Saturday mornings on the living room floor. And as the film progresses, as Barbie's world starts to crack, the pink changes. It doesn't go away, but it shifts. The warmth bleeds out of it slightly. The saturation drops incrementally. By the time we're deep in the film's emotional second half, the pink has started to feel less like paradise and more like a room that you've been in too long. A comfort that's curdling slightly at the edges. This is not an accident. This is not a coincidence. This is a cinematographer and a director working in complete harmony to use the film's visual language to tell the emotional story. The color is doing the work of telling you how Barbie is feeling about her world before she's told you herself. Before she even knows herself. Contrast this with the real-world sequences, which are shot with a kind of dusty California light, the specific quality of Los Angeles summer, where the sun is everywhere and the shadows are sharp and everything has a slightly faded, slightly bleached-out quality. Not glamorous. Not dramatic. Just real. Just the specific texture of an actual afternoon in an actual city. And in that real afternoon, in that bleached-out Los Angeles light, Barbie learns to sit on a bench. Learns to look at an old woman and find her beautiful. Learns what it feels like to be cold. learns what it feels like to be seen. The color doesn't lie. If you watch the film again, paying attention to the color temperature, you can track the entire emotional journey without paying attention to the dialogue. It's all there in the pink, in the way the pink changes, in the moment when the pink stops being paradise and becomes a costume. One of the things that I find myself thinking about often, weeks after watching the film, is the question of what Barbie was for. Not in the thematic sense that the film addresses so directly. Not the question of whether she was good or bad for women's self-image, whether she liberated or constrained, whether the impossible proportions did more damage than the career options did good. Those are important questions, and the film engages with them seriously. What I mean is something more personal. What was Barbie for the specific child who played with her? What need did she fill? What story was being told in those hours on the living room floor when a child put tiny shoes on tiny feet and drove a tiny car down an imaginary road to an imaginary life? I think the answer for most children is some version of the same thing. She was a story about the future. Not a predictive story, not a prescriptive one, just the open, hypothetical story of what if. What if I was a doctor? What if I drove this car? What if I lived in this house? What if my life was like this? And the film is saying that there's something valuable in that. In the what if. In the story that isn't yet your story but could be. In the space that imagination creates between who you are and who you might become. But it's also saying that the what if has to stay open. That the danger, the specific, quiet danger of an icon like Barbie, is when the what if closes. When it becomes prescription rather than possibility. When what if you could be a doctor becomes you should look like this while being a doctor, and then you should feel like this, and then you should want this, and then you should be this, and the story that was supposed to be an open door becomes a very specific, very narrow hallway. The film is asking for the door back. For the open what if. For the story that doesn't have a required ending. And then it ends on Barbara Handler walking into a gynecologist's office. And that is the most open, the most what if, the most fundamentally unscripted ending it could possibly have. Because nobody tells you what happens next. Not after that door closes behind her. Not after she takes a breath in the waiting room and picks up a magazine and waits for her name to be called and thinks about whatever new thing is in her new human head. What happens next is the rest of her life. And the rest of her life is hers to figure out. That's the whole movie. That's what it was always about. Let me close with something personal because I think this film earns it. I remember where I was when I first watched Barbie. I remember the experience of going and expecting one thing and getting something else. Something more layered, more patient, more willing to sit with contradiction than I had been prepared for. I remember the moment the Gloria speech started and the way the room shifted, imperceptibly, the way people leaned forward slightly, the way the comedy of the first hour found its center of gravity and settled into something quieter and more honest. I remember thinking, this is one of those films. One of those films that knows where it's going from the very first frame, that has been building something the entire time you were laughing, that reveals itself not in the big moments but in the accumulation of small ones. The cold shower, the flat foot, the bench in Venice Beach, the woman who says, I know when told she's beautiful, the tears in Ruth's garden, the gynecologist. I remember thinking, this will matter for a long time. I still think that. I think it more now, not less. I think that when we look back at American cinema in this decade, at what the movies were saying about who we are and what we're afraid of and what we want and what we've been told to want and what the difference is between those two things, Barbie is going to be in that conversation. Not despite the pink. Not despite the toy IP. Because of those things. Because Gerwig understood that the most radical thing you can do is to tell the truth inside the most familiar, most commercial, most carefully preserved packaging available, and let the truth detonate from the inside. She did that. They all did that. And Barbara Handler walked into the gynecologist's office. And that was enough. That was more than enough. Score 9 out of 10. Watch it twice. The second time, watch the color. There's one more thing worth saying. One last thread to pull before we let this film rest in the space it's earned. The film ends with a choice. But it begins with one too, and that first choice, made 64 years before the events of the film, made by a woman named Ruth Handler with a daughter named Barbara, looking at her daughter play make-believe and thinking, she needs something to make believe into, something that isn't just practice for a domestic life she hasn't chosen yet. That choice is the one the film is really about. Ruth Handler created Barbie because she saw a gap. Because she noticed that the world was giving little girls only one story and she thought they deserved more stories. And she was right. And the story she gave them was imperfect and sometimes damaging and wrapped in an impossible body and sold with a marketing machine that didn't always serve the intention behind it. And also it was revolutionary. And also it mattered. And also millions of little girls spread out on millions of living room floors and thought, for the first time or the 1,000th time, about what they could become. Both things are true. All of it is true. And the film, which is itself a contradiction, a corporate product that criticizes corporate products, a pink blockbuster that interrogates the damage of pink marketing, a Mattel film that says some very pointed things about Mattel, is living the same paradox it's describing, is being the thing it's talking about, is in its own way a Barbie. Beautiful and useful and beloved and limited and capable of more than the box suggests. Greta Gerwig put Barbara Handler in that gynecologist's office. Ruth Handler put Barbie in millions of children's hands. And somewhere in between those two gestures, separated by 64 years and the whole complicated history of what it means to be a woman in a world that can't stop arguing about what women are supposed to be, there is a through line. A thread. A story that is still being told. By the film and by all of us who watched it and felt something shift slightly in a place we didn't know needed shifting. That's what movies can do. The great ones. The ones that understand what they're for and commit to it completely and trust the audience to be smart enough and feeling enough to meet them halfway. Barbie did that. Greta Gerwig did that. Margot Robbie and Ryan Gosling and America Ferrera and Kate McKinnon and every single person who brought their specific truth to this absurd, magnificent, deeply human story did that. 9 out of 10. Nearly perfect. Human enough to have flaws. Worth every minute. Watch it. Feel it. Let it do its thing.